Let me ask you a question. Why do we put presidents on our coins, like my Dwight D. Eisenhower silver dollar, with the picture of the moon landing on the back that somehow has an eagle on the moon? Why do we do that? Of all the things we could put on our coins, we over and over and over again pick the heads of famous leaders, presidents like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or Dwight D. Eisenhower or other important figures who weren't presidents but were still important figures like Ben Franklin on the $100 bill. Why do we do it? In an essential sense, it's about saying whose realm the coins belong to, right? Because in addition to, say, the president on the coin, the back side of the coin says United States of America, right? We mark the coins of our realm to say this is currency for this realm. This place belongs to the country, the United States of America, and our coins also indicate whose reign, whose authority is exercised here. If you've ever gotten yourself frustrated thinking you had an American quarter and trying to feed it into a parking meter and then discovered, oh, there's something with antlers on here, this is a Canadian quarter, you know the importance of making sure you've got the coins for the realm, right? That you're using the currency of the actual place you're living in. If you've ever had to travel to a foreign country and exchange your money for the money that they use there, that's not just to be difficult, it's a way of marking out this realm has a different order, a different administration, a different ruler or leadership. It's a different administration, you could say. And we put coins with pictures of our presidents as one more reminder of whose realm we are living in, whose jurisdiction we are in, and also about sort of who carries authority. These are the figures that the United States history and culture treats as important, the people we put on our coin. Now, in fairness, we didn't invent this. In fact, it turns out we've been doing this going back in a succession of centuries, thousands of years, back to empires past. In the first century, in the era of the Roman Empire, on coinage of the Roman Empire, you would find Caesar's face and image and title on coins. And again, the idea was the same. It was a reminder of who's really in charge. Rome as an empire would stamp the emperor's image and insignia on coinage as a reminder to all the people it had conquered, we're in charge. You use our coinage because we're the ones who are really in charge. And that imagery was one more piece of at least Rome's propaganda over all the peoples it had conquered to say, we're in charge, you can tell, because our image of our king, our emperor is everywhere. On the coins, on the banners that would be going through the streets every time the military parades would come through, reminding everybody who had conquered them and who was really in charge, that Rome's imagery and symbolism and even pictures of its kings and emperors were stamped onto the coinage as a claim that Rome was in charge, that Rome was calling the shots, and that everything that had the imagery of Rome's king on it was therefore under Rome's jurisdiction. In other words, in the ancient world, you put your king's face on something as a way of saying, we call dibs on this. Almost like planting a flag on a space in the days of the old explorers, to say, when I would plant my flag in the beach of a place that nobody else had been before, at least I didn't think anybody else had been before, I was claiming it for my country, as if you could just call dibs. For centuries of human history, we basically operated by a system of childlike dibs calling. I found it first, therefore it's mine. I put my face on it, my flag on it, my insignia on it, as though you could just call ownership of something by putting your face on it, or your symbol, or your insignia, or your flag. In a lot of ways, we haven't matured past that, have we? And we are still stamping coins with signs of who's in charge. And knowing that that's been the practice for time immemorial almost, as long as we've been printing, making, stamping coins, we human beings as a species, we've been putting symbols of whose money this is, who's in charge, and who's calling the shots around here. So when Jesus has this conversation with some of the respectable religious folk, and they ask him with a coin, "Hey, Jesus, is it lawful, right between us and God? Is it appropriate for us to be paying tax to the emperor?" Right? Is it appropriate for us to pay tax to the empire? Right? They're godless, right? They worship this pantheon of terrible gods. They're wicked and rotten and cruel to us, who are occupied and conquered by the empire, and they're arrogant and assume they control everything. The money that's paid in taxes goes to things that we might not support, even to paying for the soldiers who are here harassing our own neighbors and walking down our streets, making us live in fear. So is it right, Jesus, for us to pay taxes? And Jesus' response, at one level, seems like it's just a clever way to avoid their trap. But I think it's actually something much more subversive. You probably know the story. Jesus said, "Well, let me see the coin that we're supposed to pay the tax with." And they hand him a coin, a Roman coin. And he asks them, whose face, whose title are stamped on this coin? And they go, "Well, the emperor's, right? Caesar's, right?" So Jesus responds, "Well, okay, Caesar's insignia is on it. He called dibs on this shiny piece of metal. Fine. Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and give to God the things that are God's." And he turns the question really back to his listeners to ask, what do you say really belongs to God? Are you going to believe Caesar's claims that the shiny metal circles are his? And if we're going to go down that road, then we need to give to God what really belongs to God, what bears God's image. And there's the whole shooting match. Because Jesus has now turned the tables to say, okay, if we're saying that Caesar gets to call dibs on shiny metal circles because he stamped his face on it, good for him, shiny metal circles for him, who and what is marked with the image of God, right? Coins are Caesar's because he stamped his image on them. Who and what belongs to God because they bear the image of God. And all of a sudden, this changes the whole conversation, right? Because everybody listening to Jesus has grown up hearing the story out of Genesis about the creation of human beings, that we are made in God's image. In fact, that's probably part of what's going on in that story from Genesis when the language is used that human beings are made in God's image. Because even in those ancient primordial times, people had seen that in every empire, the kings or queens or emperors or empresses would mark banners and official propaganda with their image to say, here is a sign that I'm in charge, I'm the ruler of this realm. And the Genesis story says, okay, God's marked creation with signs of God's claim, God's ownership, God's reign and rule over all creation in us, that we bear the image of God. And so all of a sudden, Jesus takes what was meant to be a trick question that was going to upset somebody. If Jesus says, yeah, we should pay taxes, everybody else is grumbling, we don't like to pay taxes. And what about the things that Rome does with our money that we don't like? And if Jesus says, don't pay taxes, the Romans can say, see, he's being treasonous and seditious. Jesus turns the question back on us and says, how would it change the way you treat people and interact with the world if you treated every other human being as exactly what Genesis says they are, as someone made in the image of God who bears the very presence, authority, and honor worthy of God? How would it change the conversation? And instead of me getting fussy because I don't want to pay taxes, or me getting upset about what the tax money is spent on, or me falling for the Roman propaganda that just because the emperor puts his picture on something means he gets to call dibs on it, none of those things are true. Jesus is basically saying, you can let the emperor say whatever he wants to say. My goodness, we don't have to believe him. We know the truth. The things that really matter, human beings, we're stamped in the image of God. And no emperor, no empire, no king or queen or Congress or president or prime minister, nobody can change that. God has made each one of us in the image of God. And therefore, that everyone we interact with is worthy of treating with honor and divine respect as though they are representations of God's own presence in the world. To harm another human being is to mar the very image of God, right? If it's a crime to deface a coin because that's the official currency of the realm, and technically it is a crime to deface currency, then what kind of huge violation, transgression is it to harm someone who bears the image of the ruler of all the universe, another human being who bears the image of God? Jesus has this way of taking the questions that we put to him, thinking, we need you to rule on this question, Jesus, because we need to find the right answer and the wrong answer to our questions. Jesus has this way of taking our questions and going, you're asking the wrong question, and yanking the rug out from under us and saying, you know what really matters after all? Who's made in the image of God? In such an important way, the New Testament writers keep talking about us, the followers of Jesus, as representatives, as ambassadors of God's reign, that the way we act and speak is meant to reflect to the rest of the world what God's reign is like. And that's an echo of that Genesis basic common vocation, that being human means being made in the image of God, that we are meant to represent God's presence and God's reign over all creation everywhere we go, and that our lives then are meant to be a reflection of the character of God. When we act cruelly toward other people, people will get the impression, oh, that's what God's like, because that's what those God-bearers, those Christians are showing me. When we act with compassion, with justice, with mercy, with courage, we show a reflection of the character of God in our lives. And yep, we screwed up. We mess it up sometimes, and we start over again, because the image of God in us is non-negotiable. It can't be undone. You can't abdicate it. You can't say, that's too much responsibility, I don't want it. We're stuck with it. Being human beings, being made in the image of God, we are marked with God's own presence. The question maybe is, when people look at our lives, what impression do they get of the God we say reigns and rules in all the universe? So yeah, we mark our coins with the faces of the rulers of our history's past, as a way of marking, this is the coin of the realm, this is the political state we happen to be living in. But don't let that for a moment make you forget that before the trappings of our coins that change from generation to generation, era to era, and century to century, you and I and all people are made in the image of God, whose reign isn't just one place or one territory on earth, but all of creation. How will you and I reflect the character of the God in whose image we are made? That's the conversation we're having this Sunday, and we invite you to be a part of it. See you then.